Great. Thank you for letting me know that. Welcome. Today is Thursday, June 14th, 2018. This is an Elected Officials Transportation Committee, or EOTC, meeting. We are here today to review, it's going to start out with review of decisions reached at our March 8th, 2018 meeting. John Kruger, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple housekeeping things. There are some snacks and food in the back for any of you who want those. Hard copies printed out of the meeting packet are also in the back. And on the front page on the agenda, the next meeting is actually October 18th, not the 19th. So if you make that correction to your meeting packets. The last meeting we had was March 8th, and at that meeting, one of the items discussed was the Buttermilk pedestrian crossing. And as you may recall, back in October of 2017 at the budget meeting, that was an agenda item at the $80,000 level for a needs analysis study. And the EOTC said to bring it back to the March meeting at a reduced amount and scope of $40,000. That was approved, and there's some folks here tonight who will be talking about the results of that need analysis. The Tough Mudder event was approved for the use of the Brush Creek lot for this year again. The polling results on the mill levy and ballot question were summarized by Ralph and Bill Ray, and they're here again tonight to produce, provide some further analysis and information. Brian Pettit updated the EOTC on the Regional Transportation Planner, now called the Regional Transportation Director, and he's here tonight to provide an update on that as well. The Castle Creek Bridge Hallam Street project, as probably everybody's aware, Pete Rice from the City of Aspen, who's the project manager, gave an update on that, and we are now in the pause portion of the project where there's no construction in the street, and it's on the sides. That will continue till August 20, and he'll have an update on that tonight as well. And that was the March meeting.
Right.
I would recommend, Madam Chair, we go to the updates. We're still missing.
Yeah, let me do public comment.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to open this up for public comment to items that are not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody wishing to comment? Tony, would you please come up and give your name for the public record, please?
Okay. Hi, for the record, my name is Tony Kronberg, and first I'd like to thank the Pickens County Commissioners very much for the funding for the underpass that was constructed in Basalt. It has helped traffic tremendously, and as a pedestrian that crosses that highway, never have to wait to get across the highway, and I don't have to take my own life in my hands trying to get across against the traffic. And with that being said, I know that you'll probably pull the item on the Buttermilk underpass, taking a look at that tonight. But I wanted to give my full support for that, because when you see how successful it's worked down in Basalt, you can just imagine how successful it will be at Buttermilk. And Buttermilk is, Patty, you've shared some of your personal experiences with the public about how easy it is to hit someone crossing that intersection. And then we always have to wait, whether you're coming from Snowmass or down Valley, for people to get back and forth. So hopefully we can get that done sooner than later. The second thing is Smith Hill Road. And Brian Pettit gave an update last time, and he said that CDOT said there's really not anything major that can be done right now, that they're thinking about working the stop signs that are there. For this past week, every single night, driving home, the flashing light at the top of Smith Hill Road has been out. So I have to call dispatch and say the flashing light to warn people to cross the highway is out. And that should not fall onto someone driving down Valley who pays attention to that intersection to have to call in. So I know there's a work in progress.
I see Brian making notes behind you.
That's good. And then the second thing was I called Brian in a panic coming up Valley, because cars that were coming up Valley, this is when all the bridge work was going on, making that shortcut going across the highway along McLean Flats Road, They were actually backed up into the fast lane of Highway 82. And there were so many near misses. Cars were going like this and trying to make the left-hand turn going around. The cars are pushed back. I don't know what's going to have to happen, but something's probably going to have to happen. Where they're closing that crossing, going back and forth. But I know your next meeting is in October for elected officials, but I believe that that is considered a CDOT project, a highway project, not an elected officials transportation transit project. But I just wanted to just keep us all on the same page that, and Brian, if he feels up to it tonight, he can address that that situation has just gotten worse at Smith Hill Road. And then the other thing is I have to leave a little bit because I'm working the concert up in Snowmass tonight, and I hope that you get your meeting done cut short so you can get up there. But the regional director position, again, that is another position I think that will help tremendously. Last time I spoke, I mentioned about how John Kruger has single-handedly done that job, and he's probably saved the Pickens County commissioners and Snowmass and the city of Aspen. What did we figure out? At least $1.5 million, $2 million.
He's worth every penny of it.
He certainly is. I know you're not going to let him go, but if we could get that position on, because then some of the things that I'm bringing forward to the EOTC, I can just bring to the regional director, and he can take a look at the safety aspects of it. And then the very last thing is we're getting very close to running out of options for the entrance to Aspen. And now it's not only the congestion going to the entrance to Aspen, but going to Snowmass too. And once Base Village gets built out, you're going to have a minimum of probably 600 people coming out of Snowmass going into Aspen. So I don't know if Snowmass is looking at four-laning Brush Creek.
No.
Hopefully, we're going to keep those 600 people in Snowmass.
That's our goal. We don't plan on
That's the answer I was looking for.
Well, we have free bus service.
And let's keep it focused on public comment.
But that was a good point that Bob made, because it would be great if they could keep those people in Snowmass. But Aspen's got such a great reputation. It's still a beautiful town. You can see the mountains from the town. So I know that people will continue coming into Aspen. And we are making progress with the Aspen aerial connection. As you know, Lift 1A was approved, and the SE consultants. We didn't think we could bring Lift 1A further down the mountain, and with the mayor's leadership and Aspen City Council's leadership, they were able to work with the consultant and bring it down. And hopefully that same consultant can help us with the Highway 82 Brush Creek along connecting Aspen and Snowmass to the airport, that can move forward also. And I've had one major project, and this is my time frame. I've been able to actually figure it out, undertaking that aerial connection and outreach to the public. John Wooster told me it was going to take me 10 years to get that off the ground. And so I waited 10 years, and I'm getting ready to start now, and hopefully it'll only take a couple of years. Had one City of Aspen major project that's taken me the last 2 years, getting ready to wrap that up. But this summer, I plan on starting the effort for community support for that aerial connection.
Okay.
So I just wanted to give everybody a little time
Thanks.
frame
Drive
there.
carefully, go out to Snowmass. Have fun at the concert.
That'd be great. See you there, I hope.
Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none. John, are we still waiting for?
Yeah, if we could, Madam Chair, I'd like to jump through a couple of the updates.
Okay, we're still waiting for one of the presenters who's stuck in traffic.
They're taking the bus.
They're stuck in traffic.
He's polling people out there. Okay.
So I'll provide an update on the battery electric bus program. As you know, we've been working on this with staff for 2 years or so. We had demonstrations, buses, DNR was wrapped up. We worked through a big work session we had. And last Monday, this Aspen City Council approved a letter of financial commitment to the funding process. So the City of Aspen's on board as one of the funding partners for the battery electric bus program. It involves 8 buses that would operate in the Aspen and Upper Valley area. And the other funding partners, it always seems on these big projects, it seems to take a lot of different funding partners and a lot of different sources to make these things happen. So the elected officials were contributing to the program, and then RAFTA was able to kind of manage funding from the statewide FASTER grant Senate Bill 228 funds and the Low-No grant. And between the local match on that and the city match, we've been able to come up with the funds, enough funding to hopefully be able to purchase the buses. The RAPTA board will consider this, I think, Dan, right, at the July meeting? And then if that goes according to plan, we'll be able to put an order in for the buses soon after with possible delivery in 2019. In my mind, that's a really big thing, a big step in a positive direction for everything. The climate action plan, there's so many different advantages, but we want to stress this. It's kind of a pilot program because we've never, while this technology is out operating around in the country and it's becoming more of a proven technology, we haven't operated them up here on a daily, hourly basis. So this will be really great to see how well they do, how they respond at altitude, in the weather, and so forth. So I think this is a huge, important step, at least from the city side, to participate, and I hope the RAPTA board will see it that way too.
Rachel?
Thank you. John, I'm wondering, when this Ruby Park was rebuilt, did it include electric chargers for electric buses?
No, it did not.
Okay, and the RAFTA facility out at the Airport Business Center that's been kind of remodeled and enlarged a little?
Well, they have, my understanding, and I don't know, maybe Dan can talk to this, but my understanding is that they have the capacity electrically wise out there to do it. We're still going to have to install the chargers and get all that organized. But I don't think that's a huge deal. It may involve some talks with Holy Cross about the power and how that's going to work.
Okay, thank you.
Does the newly reconfigured bus barn have any solar? Sorry, Dan. I'm bringing you up to the table early.
Dan Blankenship, RAFTA. We acquired a solar array, I think it was 504 kilowatt hours or something like that, in the Sunnyside solar array that's up above Carbondale, Catherine Store, if you go up towards
Right.
Missouri Heights. And that is generating a significant amount of the power that we use at the Aspen maintenance facility. I don't think it's supplying all of the power that we need there. And so, talking to George Newman, there he is way over here, he was suggesting, and I think we've already been kind of looking into some possibility of trying to acquire solar power either through Holy Cross. Our understanding is that Holy Cross may be developing its own set of arrays, and we could just buy solar power from them for slightly more than the regular electricity through the grid. But we wouldn't have to invest in all the infrastructure and so forth, because the solar array that we acquired, while in the long term, maybe over 20, 25, 30 years, will pay for itself and probably save us money. In the near term, it's costing us more than it would just to, buy power from.
But there's nothing on the actual facility and no opportunities to put solar there?
Well, I think there are opportunities to do it. We'd have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of putting all the infrastructure on the roof. I think our preference would be not to do it on site if we had a better place for it. But I think we would explore that, and we might ultimately do it. But if we could get it for slightly more expensive than regular power through Holy Cross, that might be the way to go. It'd be just like buying wind energy.
Right. Okay, thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bert.
One, I think Bert Myron, I think it's important the source of power is green. We can't have a carbon source power and spend all this money on electric buses. That would make no sense. And to be aware of, I think the story told recently about Denver RTD paying 3 or 4 times their expected power rate because of demand surcharges, to avoid that happening. Sure. So I think some planning in advance on the power side, in addition to the buses, needs to happen.
We're in the process of exploring those issues. The buses, if we order them within the next month or so, would take about a year to deliver, which would give us time to install the infrastructure and also to explore opportunities to acquire solar power through either developing it ourselves or tapping into something that Holy Cross could supply us.
And if RTD doesn't successfully renegotiate their power, would their buses then be on sale secondhand?
I can't answer that question. I don't think that they would probably do that, but from what I understand, electric buses get the equivalent of about 20 miles per gallon versus a diesel or CNG at 5 miles per gallon. So even if the power costs a bit more, it's probably still going to be more economical from a fuel standpoint than a gas or diesel bus.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty.
Great, thanks.
Patty,
Yep. Yes.
quick question, Dan. These buses, they are 100% electric. There's no backup energy involved or backup engine?
I think that we're exploring the potential of putting on some auxiliary heaters in the buses
Well,
because,
correct. We talked about that months ago, but
but aside from that, they just operate on the batteries.
Okay.
All the accessories are electrical, but you can look at an auxiliary heating unit.
right.
Because it draws a lot in the wintertime, and
Okay.
the range would not be as great.
Any other questions? Yeah, Steve?
Dan?
Not used to sharing a mic, so let me.
Well, mine?
It's okay.
Easy part.
I want to know if Bert's question has merit. It's really interesting. What he's asking broadly is about an inventory of existing electric buses who are failing the objectives of their communities, and might they be available and an opportunity for purchase, considering demand for these new built buses and the cost.
Buy used, you mean? They're selling.
Yeah, because they're failing to meet the objectives of those communities for one reason or another.
Well, I don't look at the used bus one ads very often to know where those systems might be, Steve. But we certainly could look into it. But I guess my feeling is that if some other transit system is wanting to divest themselves of these buses, we might not want to acquire them here. It's a new technology. And the reason we call it a pilot project is that there are a lot of unknowns. But there were a lot of unknowns with compressed natural gas, and we run into problems, and we've worked with the manufacturer to kind of address them. As the industry transitions more and more to electric buses, the technology is going to improve, and the costs are going to come down. So I can see what we can find out there, but I didn't get from what you were saying, Bert, that RTD had for sale signs on them yet. The only buses that I know that they have that are electric, they're operating on the 16th Street Mall.
Those buses are BYD buses, and BYD is having a few issues right now. They have a different charging setup, different arrangement. They're getting challenged a bit out in California. We went through a pretty extensive research discussion, RFP process to get to New Flyer, and there's a lot of good reasons we chose them. So I would hesitate about buying the BYD buses right now.
What is BYD?
Made in China. Well, they're a China
that's a brand.
company,
It's a
but they're
brand.
made in California.
It's a brand.
Yes.
Okay.
So I would be curious if they're not meeting the expectations of the community, if it's related to the buses or the deployment and how they're using them.
It's the power discussions they're having with the power provider, isn't it, Dan? That's more than anything.
Well, at RTD, I mean, I think that when they charge the buses, they're getting hit with a peak demand charge, which is pretty pricey for them. I haven't heard any issues related to them that have to do with the buses not operating or something like that.
I'm not suggesting we buy deficient machinery. I am suggesting if there's an opportunity, these buses are over $1 million a piece, and we're talking about 12.
No, we're talking 8.
Eight over the next X number of years. If we could
I don't
increase
know.
our inventory of electric buses more quickly by exploring some creative
I don't know
avenue.
any
That's
community who's getting rid of them. In fact, everybody, if you look around, everybody's wanting and ordering more.
Right.
They're not getting rid of them or getting less. Everybody's wanting more of them and making a bigger commitment. We're lucky to get in line with New Flyer probably
When we did.
where we are.
Okay.
So Dan, are they charging their buses during peak times? Is that why they're getting set with a
You know,
charge?
I have not read the article. Bert is, as usual, he's kind of ahead of the rest of the pack here, so I would have to kind of, we know people at RTD, we could talk to him about what the exact concerns or issues are. But that's probably it. Those buses operate on the 16th Street Mall, and they have a lot of them out there during peak times, and then they come off, and then maybe when they're charging them, that's when the prices are higher as far as utility company is concerned.
Okay, I think, is that Mr. Ray that just?
Yeah, I think we can switch back to the agenda now if you
Yeah,
like.
why don't we do that, and then we can come back and finish up on updates. So John, you can take it away again.
I'll let Ralph and Mr. Ray.
Yeah, let's start passing around here.
Why don't you give me half of those, and you can take half of these. Take half of these. Yeah. So, and then the extras we can give to our viewing audience.
Is that a different packet than what we already have?
Yes, sir. There's not a brochure in your packet.
No, but yes, I had packets of those.
Yeah, we have the presentation, and it is different. Same thing. We just got the polling data this morning.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, it's computed and it's,
Thank you. Hey, that's okay, we just worked around.
It's the same one I got this morning. You just changed the cover sheet. Sorry, Bill. Good to see you.
It's giving you way too many. There you go, sir.
sir.
This was all in the package. This is different from this.
Is it the same as this?
You got it.
We got it.
Yeah,
Just one.
Oh, it's so much fun. I love it.
Well, that's all I had left.
Congrats.
I had nothing to do with
Yeah,
it.
you?
Stamp here, John?
You will have to.
Whatever the rest of the time.
Oh.
Okay, we ready to roll? Because I want to try and keep us
No, I
on
didn't do it
schedule here, so.
We can roll.
Thanks, Ralph.
Well, thank you for indulging us.
meeting
Bill was a
people.
little
Hey, guys.
delayed.
I didn't want to get into it.
I'm Ralph Trapani with Parsons. I'm part of the blended Rafta Parsons Transportation Planning Team. Madam Chair, I'd like to get into the presentation. We're talking about our Destination 2040 planning process tonight. The agenda tonight is I'm going to quickly go through the project list, the financial capacity analysis, and those really represent a summary of the May board retreat. You're going to see the data that the board worked with. Bill Ray is here, our election consultant, to present polling results. We'll talk briefly about next steps and get into a discussion. So first of all, a project list. Dan has passed those around. Let me get my props here. That's the 8.5 by 11 sheet, but these are project lists that you've seen before. The update that we did, since you've seen them, we've renamed some of the alternatives for clarity, the major topics. We grouped the projects into 3 large categories, which would be improvements for the environment, and that's on your first page. And when you go back further, you get into improvements for reducing congestion, improving mobility, and improvements for safety and sustainability. And I won't go through it in detail. You've seen these projects. They're just repackaged to address really some clarity and explanation. We've updated costs, and we also numbered the projects then to coincide with the project map, which is inside the brochure, and it's now up on screen too. So you can go through color coding. I know there's interest here in terms of what particular projects are beneficial to the Upper Valley, and you can just really go to the map and see it. Starting really at the Eagle County, Basalt, Pitkin County line, you can see the projects. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them, but the way the key works is, for example, you see E3. You can go over E3 is a green project, E3 is real traveler time information. C7, another important project, improvements to bus stations. So I'm not going to spend detailed time on this brochure. This brochure was done by Rafta. It's an excellent brochure. We've gotten a lot of good information. On the outside pages, It talks a little bit about traffic growth forecasting, the age of the RAFTA fleet, what a 3.65 mill levy looks like, a little more background information on the ITSP, and kind of some talk about the growth of population and employment in the valley. So let me talk a little bit about the financial capacity analysis that we did. This was done for the board to help them with their decision making at the retreat. We went through 4 scenarios, and those scenarios are described in my next prop, which is this sheet. It's a little hard to read, but it's probably easier to read than what you're going to see on the screen. So the first scenario the board considered was at 2 mil. That's a status quo, which basically doesn't include any service improvements. It's just improvements to the maintenance facilities and also bus replacement. So that's what you get for 2 mil. The next scenario the board reviewed was sustainable growth. That allows, and you can see in the green, in the sustainable growth column, you can see that that includes all the service improvements that were described, the maintenance facility improvements, and then we start drilling down into bike share expansion, park and ride expansions, improvements to town of Snowmass Center. I'm just hitting some high points here, buttermilk parking management, and so on. So sustainable growth is covered at about 3.55 mil. The Destination 2040 stakeholder recommendations, which is basically the list with the exception of the circulators, comes through at 3.65 mils. That is what the board landed on then to move ahead. And another scenario we ran for them is what we're calling the all-in regional RAFTA member projects. So that not only includes all the service improvements, the maintenance facility improvements, the buttermilk Ped Crossing is in there, for example, but it also includes circulators for Carbondale, Basalt, Newcastle, and additional work on the Rio Grande Trail. And just as a reminder, RAFTA's got the ability to go as high as 5 mils. I don't think the board was comfortable with that. The board wasn't comfortable with the all-in at 4.2, and they ended up landing on the 3.65. So we did determine this project list that I went through, and we did a course analysis of cash flow, bonding, interest, inflation. That was actually done by RAFTA, by Mike Yang, and he did an excellent job on it. So again, I want to just reiterate, the service plan improvements are a really important aspect of Destination 2040. The status quo, of course, just gets you buses, but all of the other scenarios include really good service improvements, which is what we heard as we were doing the multi-year outreach process for this. There'd be a 30-minute valley service, weekend BRT in spring and fall, Grand Hogback service, which is from Glenwood to Newcastle, to our Newcastle member community and Glenwood member communities. We're really wanting that. That'll get us 30-minute headways. And what's interesting about that service is that'll allow people in West Garfield County to come to Newcastle and get on the bus. And ever since the Grand Avenue Bridge, the Newcastle Park and Ride is filled up with people coming from Silt and Rifle wanting to ride the bus. Then, of course, there's some expansion of service in Glenwood Springs, and also better transit connections to Snowmass Village. So those are all included with the exception of the 2 mil scenario. I'm not going to go through this again. You can see why I handed it out. It's pretty hard to kind of tease this out in the chart, but you can see that project list, and you can get a pretty good idea at your seats of what the 3.65 mils get you. So the retreat went really well. We did it at RMI back in May instead of a board meeting, in lieu of a board meeting. And I felt the conversation went really well with the board. We did have some discussions about the costs. Marky raised an issue about value engineering we talked about. But one of the aspects I want to talk about relative to costs is this financial capacity analysis assumed 3% growth for revenues, which would be the new property tax if the board decides to move it, and also 3% increase for construction cost escalation. So if you want to talk about messing around with the cost, you could also go and start messing around with the revenues. But anyway, we feel that we did a good balancing act of revenue versus cost. Now, the board presented this morning, and we're not prepared to present it tonight, but the board presented, and we presented a detailed financial model to the board this morning. And that was done by PFM and Mike Yang. Again, an excellent job. It's not on the agenda for tonight, but I want to mention at 3.65 mils, PFM confirmed with a detailed financial model that the numbers work out. There's some ups and downs, but generally the cash reserves stay good. The bonding ratios, which I don't completely understand, according to Mr. Hodge, our PFM experts, stay good. Dan, do you want to add a comment on the PFM model at this point, or?
Well, the way that Mr. Hodge, I think, characterized the plan is that it's very efficient, meaning that there's not a lot of extra revenue in it. It's tight, so it's going to be sensitive to fluctuations in revenue growth and fluctuations in expenditures. But we're not developing, based on all of the assumptions that are in the model, a big surplus of fund balance and so forth going out into the out years. And it cash flows, I think he went out to 2050.
Right.
However, the thing that I think we really need to let the public understand, as well as members of the board and the EOTC and so forth, is that we have a fleet with currently 90-plus buses that RAFTA owns. And they need to be replaced every 12 to 15 years. We have some buses in our fleet that are, we have 4 or 5 that are about 20 years of age, and we try to take care of them. But in terms of life cycle costing, you do hit a point of diminishing returns with buses when you run them longer, because parts are harder to come by, they're more expensive, they're harder to maintain, and they're less reliable. So when you're driving up and down 82 and you see a bus parked on the side of the road, in some cases those are older pieces of equipment that have malfunctioned. And so that's not great for building consistency and reliability into your service. So buses, like a 40-foot diesel bus, is probably close to $500,000 fully equipped. Natural gas, add another $60,000, $70,000 on top of that. Currently, electric buses are running about $900,000 to $1 million if you include the price of chargers and so forth in them. So these have to be replaced every 12 to 15 years, or maybe you can push them out to 17 or 18 or something along those lines. But eventually they have to be replaced. And they are increasing in price at, the rate of inflation, 3%, maybe more. EPA changes add to the cost of the buses. Technology changes add to the cost of the buses. And as long as we operate buses in this valley, we're going to have to replace them. And those numbers are huge going out to 2050. So a lot of in looking at the long-range forecast, while everything kind of cash flows pretty well into 2040 and maybe between 2040 and 2050, but when we hit that next cycle of bus replacements, then we might need more resources. But by 2050, maybe buses are less expensive, or maybe they're autonomous, or maybe we can just beam people up to Aspen. There's a lot of unknowns. And so one thing I can say about the model is it's the most sophisticated and detailed model that RAFTA has ever had. And it's something that we would want to update every year and be able to use it to tell us what the implications are of decisions we make in a current year as far as budget will be on the long term. And it's going to be a fantastic tool for us to have because it's very forward-looking.
Well, thanks, Dan.
Steve has a question. I believe.
Ralph, I think you should add 2 things. The work PFM did was really detailed. It was substantial. But a couple things should be mentioned. Number one, there's an assumption. And the assumption is that that there's a debrucing.
Yes, that's
and
correct.
That's a big assumption. Secondly, could you comment just very briefly on why bonding is necessary as a funding source if we're pursuing a mill levy?
Dan, you want to tackle that?
Well,
PFM touched on it this morning.
I think it's for cash flow purposes.
Right.
If we were going to try to pay cash for the improvements that are on the list that was just shown, we would have to defer making any of those improvements for a number of years until we built up enough cash reserves to be able to handle it. But the buying power of those cash reserves is going to be, it's going to be eroded by inflation over time and the escalation in construction costs. So for cash flow purposes, the model, what it assumed basically is that we're going to pay cash when we have sufficient cash balances to do so. Other times, when we have significant capital improvements to fund, where there's a spike in those capital costs, that would be the time that we would bond.
Right. Okay, good.
Well, let me keep moving, and just to wrap up, we had a very good board meeting today. We presented an awesome amount of data to the board, and I left feeling bad at the amount of data we presented, but you're getting a pretty good summary tonight of some of that stuff. I'm sure the PFM proposal will be available on the RAFTA website. It's got a lot of details about the financial model. And the other big item this morning was the regional poll. And I'm going to turn that over to Bill Ray and let him grab a microphone and talk us through that. Bill, just let me know when you want to move a slide.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, board members, and apologies again for my tardiness. We did conduct another poll of the RAFTA region and the RAFTA service area to see where we were at with the public on this, what is now called Destination 2040. So we did conduct a poll from May 29th to June 7th. We had about 20 questions in that poll. We did have a target of 400 responses, but we ended up with 305. There's just challenges in completing surveys at the beginning of the summer and with people maybe not wanting to pick up their phone. But we did get 305 responses to that survey. Our second poll, thanks, Ralph. Our second poll finds little overall movement actually in the attitude since our January poll. That can be kind of something good, something bad, but statistically we stayed right about at the same place on messaging, on the concept of the ballot, on the key things that people like about the RAFTA Destination 2040 plan. They remain very positive about RAFTA itself. They're concerned about traffic congestion still, and they're still focused very much on protecting the environment. Less than half of the voters we polled are familiar with the proposal, and less than 20% are very familiar, and we'll talk about that in a later slide and what we're going to do to communicate our plan, communicate much more to the broad community about what Destination 2040 is. Currently, voters are fairly evenly divided, 44-43 on the ballot question. It's very important to note that we made an addition to the ballot language, which was to add the bonding in there and the concept of $100 million in bonding with up to $200 million to repay the debt. And because of what's required by Tabor and the way we write that, it can be striking to people to see those kind of numbers. So we were encouraged that we still kind of held our own based on the last poll by adding in that new information on the bonding. Our strongest supporters remain the same. They're younger. They're younger males. They're Democratic. They're definitely RAFTA users, and they live in Pickens County. People who are not as supportive were older, women, Republicans, non-RAFTA users, and those who live more down valley. We do our messaging and testing in the poll, and then we re-ask a question at the end if you've changed your mind on this. And in the poll, we went to 51% support to 40% opposed, and that almost exactly mirrors that same number in the January poll, where we went to 51-39 in the January poll. The people who moved, younger Republicans, older independent men, older Democrats, where then once they got some information, they were much more open to the RAFTA question. We also did ask an exercise, and our pollster, Todd Vitale, calls it an exercise in voter psychology, where we ask if they're open to voting for this if we reduce the mill levy amount. Now, I want to caution you, they're not told any trade-offs. They're not told if it's less, this project might not happen. So you have to be careful with this number. But it shows us that 9 points of voters are willing to move their vote to yes if it was less. Now, those voters might need to know more about the trade-offs. They might need to know more about why it's less so that they can have an informed decision. What that number really helps us understand is who is willing to change and move toward yes, and is there, through better communications and more information, are they then willing actually to support the program as a whole? And what we learned from there is, interestingly, in these groups of people who move, a lot of them are Eagle County, Basalt, older voters, Democrat voters, and then some younger voters. So there are some audiences that we probably need to communicate with better, who would have more support and be more interested in the RAFTA 2040, Destination 2040 plan. The top messages still revolve around electrification of the buses, especially for environment and noise reduction, increasing transit options, multi-use trails still really, the Rio Grande and the Lova Trail still do very well, and keeping those fares the same, and also free fares for seniors. Let's switch just real quick so you can see public opinion on RAFTA still remains high. 79% in January gave us an A or a B. That's 74% now. So good, strong support of RAFTA. Here you can see this is our initial ballot test here, and you can kind of see we're 44-43, so really strong feelings on this. There's a very large group of strong no's. We had that in January. That group is generally characterized, we ask an open-ended question to find out, well, why are you a no? And it's generally a very strong anti-tax, tax sensitivity group, as to be expected. But what groups make up the yeses? Democratic men, independents or unaffiliateds, Democrats. Who are in the no? Republicans, older unaffiliated independents. So that didn't change much from the January poll. And an important number remains this kind of undecided group. And in their open-endeds, this 13 points of undecided, they were very focused on, we just don't know much about the plan. We need more information. We need to know that the money's going to good projects. We need to understand where the money's going to go. So that's a challenge for us to, increase our message. And then the final slide, and I'm happy to take questions and give more detail, but I know we're trying to keep this meeting moving, just shows 51% support it on the second ballot ask. So we definitely move. Very importantly, we pick up quite a few definitely yeses on our side and kind of build a stronger base of support. And then we pull in more of those undecideds probably on our side. So we've moved people to strongly yes. We pulled some of those undecideds in. So as we learned in our previous poll in January, to kind of know the plan is to like it better. And so I think on subsequent slides we're going to talk about our continued outreach. But what we've definitely learned, we're where we were before. We've introduced the concept of bonding, which has some large numbers associated with it, but we still need to communicate this plan and program much more broadly and much more directly with the constituencies here in the RAFTA communities.
Before we move on to wrap this up, this might be a good time if you've got any questions for Bill while we've got the slides up.
I have a question, and forgive me if I missed it, but what was the breakdown, or do you know, of the people who you polled who are property owners, residential or commercial? Because I think for me that's important. Yeah, I'm going to vote for it because I don't own property. Yeah. So we hear that a lot. We count on that a lot, actually.
So I'd like to reserve the right to get back to you on that. However, we definitely, on my demography slide provided by the pollster for the January, we had that in there, and he must not have added that to this slide. So
Okay, just if you can get back to me.
Am I able to follow up with you?
You know where to
But
find us.
We definitely do ascertain that because it's an important data point for us.
Okay. Rachel and then Steve.
Thank you very much for the work, Bill. And I realize it's really hard to kind of reach into people's minds and psyches. And my concern, quite frankly, is that the state ballot initiative for a sales tax increase is going forward. And they're collecting signatures at this time. And I don't think that people have been asked, will you support 2 tax increases for mass transit? And that campaign at the state level is probably going to be spending $7 or $9 million on television advertising and flyers and everything that will talk about the new increased funding for mass transit and mass transit pools. And I only have the current distribution estimates here, but they're saying that 20% of the new revenue will go to cities, and that's going to be $216 million a year that cities can spend flexibly. You know, it'll go back as a proration. Counties will be $216 million a year to spend on their roads or mass transit. And then the multimodal section of the bill will be generating $162 million a year for transit agencies to apply to and to complete projects. And you know, this is just going to be on the ballot first. When people get these long, lengthy ballots, you know, has any polling been asked, you know, what would you pick, one or the other or both, or, you know, and just to bring it home and not to take too much time, I'm driving to Montrose tonight after the meeting, so I don't want to run long either, but I see how bad the rest of the state roads are and the roads that RAFTA has to drive on, and those potholes cost alignments. You know, they really are problematic. We'd love to be able to widen the shoulders on the Crystal River Trail and have a CDOT that could actually do that, or them funding their own underpasses the way they should be instead of us. So it's going to be a real challenge, I think. And I have always supported RAFTA questions and worked campaigns fairly hard for RAFTA. But I'm really concerned that this, you know, might be trying to run a marathon with a 40-pound backpack on and not realizing you got this load on your back, because there will be competing concerns. And, you know, I could really pretty quickly see the negative ads say, why vote for this when this one's going to give you that, you know, or people literally just asking, do you need this much of a mill levy increase if this statewide passes and you're already going to be receiving these new dollars? So to me, I don't have anything very substantive to really weigh out of whether there's a chance of success or no success given the broader circumstances.
I'll take a quick part of that, and then I might hand the mic to Dan, who gave the board, sorry Dan, I'm going to put you in the hot seat, but he did give the board, because this question came up at the board meeting this morning, and Dan had some good thoughts on the funding and why RAFTA needs to still continue down the road and keep the process moving on this. So that's why I'm going to look to Dan, but agreed that there's some weight of a backpack that this presents, and that if we move to campaign phase, and the campaign would need to do some more political messaging polling, and there could be a message there might be a need
local match,
or
we
a
need
campaign
this, blah, blah, but
to distinguish itself, to find a way to communicate to voters that there's trade-offs or there's a distinguishing here. And I don't know, my crystal ball doesn't tell me what that is yet. We also heard from a RAFTA board member representing a community down the valley that their council or their city staff has done the math on what they believe the policy implications are on the ballot initiative, and they are concerned about the share back what that means to their community. And I don't want to speak for that board member, but maybe I'll slide the mic over to Dan, who gave a very good explanation, though, on the funding formula and how it impacts RAFTA.
Okay, well, first I would just say that the board is, we have another meeting in July, and then the August 9th meeting is going to be a public hearing, and in between then and now, we're noticing to all the municipalities and counties and the public that we're looking for feedback and input on this proposal. And then the board would have until that August 9th meeting to make a decision about whether to go forward or not, or if it is going forward, how much. So nothing has been firmed up. We've just kind of honed in on the 3.65 for polling purposes and for planning purposes. We might continue that meeting to the 30th of August, which I believe is the last Thursday and the last time that we could make that kind of decision, just so that we could get more public awareness of the proposal and also more feedback and input. We plan to do due diligence, let's say, on this this proposed ballot question to see what it means in terms of funding. What I've heard and what has been written by Bill in your packet is that the kind of preliminary information is that the funds available for transit would be allocated to the transportation planning regions based on ridership, revenue miles, and low-income people that could take advantage of or need to take advantage of transit services. I think RTD's district is going to probably get the lion's share of the funding. The balance is going to be distributed to another 10 or 11 TPRs throughout the state. We would probably be second in line for the funding, but I'm not sure what that amount would be on an annual basis. And I'm not sure whether or not it would continue to be like it is now, pretty much discretionary. So every year you're putting in an application and you're competing with Avon and with Eagle and with Vail and everybody else that's in Snowmass Village and everybody else that's in our TPR. So it makes it really difficult, if that's going to be the methodology for distributing the funds, for RAFTA to really plan on it long term. Would we benefit from it? Most likely. We would apply every year, and we would try to get our seat at the table and make sure we got as much money as we could. But I can't quantify that. 3.65 mils is about $14 million in year one. And that is looking to be just about enough to fund the projects on this list and to replace the buses at least through about 2045 or 2050. So between now and the August board meeting, we're going to be trying to get as much information as we can about, okay, how does this get split up again, and how much reasonably could our TPR expect? And then at the TPR, what's going to be the process for making sure that each system gets an adequate amount of funding? We're a big system. You would think that we would get the most. But it would be great if they could say, plus or minus from one year to the next, you can count on this much, that, just based on your size and our relationship and the history of RAFTA applying for grants at CDOT, that of the $15 million that our TPR gets, maybe you get $7 million. Would that help? It would be an enormous help. It would help us be able to replace buses and do some other capital projects on the list, but it wouldn't get them all. The trick is going to be, I think, figuring out how it would work and how much we could rely on those funds. And then there's the other unknown, which is, will it pass? And let's say, well, we decide that, we could say we're going to go for less and see if it passes. We could say we're not going to go for anything and see if it passes. And then it doesn't pass. And then our next opportunity is to go back in 2020. Every jurisdiction in here could have something on the ballot then, and they could come back in 2020 again. And so people would say, well, RAFTA, have you thought about the implications of these two things being on the ballot? And so we'd say, well, yes, we understand, and then we'll wait our turn in 2022 or 2024. But the longer that we wait to address what we know from our plans as an issue that's going to catch up with us in about the middle of the next decade, the more challenging, the steeper the curve is going to be. So nothing's been decided. This is great input, good questions, and hopefully we'll have more information, and I have a lot of confidence in the people that you have appointed, Marky and Steve and George, to make the right decision.
So that comes back to the RAFTA board the end of August for a final decision. So I'm looking at my county manager. I'd like to get time for the Board of Commissioners to have a discussion before that meeting so we can give direction to our RAFTA rep to where our board as a whole stands. I think it's important that those this is a critical ballot question. It's a critical issue. And I think we need to have support from the councils and the boards as a whole.
If we're going to have a chance of success, it is critical that we have the backing of not only the RAFTA board, but the boards of every member jurisdiction.
Because as you also know, we have a very critical ballot question on in November, so we're going to be getting stretched in all directions. I think Ward would like to.
Yeah, I have a question about, when was the last time a mill levy like this passed in this region?
Individual counties, because there's not been a cross-county thing, but I'd say the Pickens County Open Space and Trails mill levy last year.
And that was, what was it?
What was our?
It was a renewal at 5 point some odd mills.
CMC had a mill levy.
George?
Just a couple of months ago, Crown Mountain Rec District passed almost a 2 mil for the Mid-Valley.
Yeah.
2 months ago.
Actually, that was
Yeah, and Ward, I don't know how long ago it was, but the Grand River Hospital District out at the other end of the Colorado River Valley passed about a little under 4 mil, and I think it's been years ago. I think it's been 5 or 6 years now. So.
They just passed. And one other, real quick, I'm going to look at Rachel for this. There's more than one possibility of transit questions or road questions on the state ballot. What happens if they all 3 pass?
You know, I wouldn't know. There is the one that's coming out of the Independence Institute, Ron Caldera.
Fix the damn roads.
Fix the damn roads, which has zero new money, no new money, no money for transit, no money for city or county sharebacks. It's pretty much just bonding only and says the general fund will be able to pay for it out of the state of Colorado. So it's very attractive to say, hey, we can fix everything with no new revenue, but it really leaves a lot of people out. And you guys have all heard it before, but the Front Range communities, that Dr. Cog, Denver Metro Chamber, all the partners who've come together on this potential .63, they're all saying this is the last shot to create a statewide funding system. And if this fails, we're going to do our own individual RTAs, and we're going to take care of our own congestion, our own needs. And you guys out there in rural Colorado with all the miles, you're just going to get stuck with what CDOT has left.
So there's that one, Fix the Damn Roads. There's the other one that's being petitioned, and there's a third one.
I'm not sure
the third one is Initiative 93, which is not transportation related. That's an income tax increase for public education.
Okay.
And in your board packet, Bill prepared a memo that kind of topically talks about these 3 initiatives that are all going to be potentially on the statewide ballot, so you can dig in. It's at the tail end of this agenda item.
But my question was really redirecting it now for transportation and road funding. So if the 2 that are coming out of the state both pass.
They are not in conflict with each other.
So you could have 2 that pass.
The only problem with, not the only problem with Fix Our Damn Roads, but it has a prescriptive list of the road projects in it. So it is prescriptive, as in it's 60-some road projects, no transit, and it's prescriptive, no transit. Now, if the larger coalition sales tax one passes, that might be the ability for the general fund money, which the Fix Our Damn Roads says it has to be existing revenue for the state, but it's very prescriptive. But does that free up the sales tax to go fund other and different projects? But they are not in conflict.
Yeah.
If they both pass, they both implement.
They both pass, yeah.
Patty?
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Dan, so this kind of piggybacks a little bit onto Rachel's question. So we've got all these various initiatives, and as you say, they could all pass. And how is RAFTA planning to market its Destination 2040 to avoid confusion between 1, 2, and 3 of all these things.
Do you want?
Bill is probably going to, once this transition to... Sorry. Got it. I'm not used to people yelling at me, except for the board members.
Especially when your name's not Mike.
At some point, this transitions to a campaign, and there will be a campaign committee formed, and there will be people advising us. Bill could be one of those people. He's got a lot of experience. But as he mentioned earlier, what we hope to be able to do between now and the decision point in August is to get more information in the hands of the public through mailers, through radio ads, and so forth, just trying to give them information that you find on the brochure, and also to direct them to the RAFTA website, Destination 2040 page, where a lot of this information is available. We will also probably develop some type of a survey for people to fill out where we can get feedback and input. So before we get to the campaign, at least we want as many people in the region to understand that we have a plan that we are trying to advance. And we also will let them know as part of that process that the decision hasn't been made. The decision would be made in August, and we want to hear from them. And then if the decision is made to move forward, then that task of differentiating Destination 2040 from the other measures would be the job, I guess, of that campaign committee to kind of explain all the different measures, what they would do, but in particular how Destination 2040 is different and why it's still needed.
I mean, I would suggest that at the August meeting that you have some more definitive answers to that question, so that people, as they're providing their input, can factor those things into their decision as to the likelihood of support at the 365 level or something else.
Right. Correct.
One of the mayors in the valley did an analysis. I mean, it is going to be 0.62% sales tax. So each individual community can do the math and kind of figure out how much you're going to contribute and how much you're going to come back, because the formula is there. And I'm not going to divulge the numbers, but Mayor Gamba can talk eloquently about that. But to keep things moving, Dan talked about kind of the mailers and some of the summer outreach we're talking about. Madam Chair suggested the boards need to get involved. We are scheduling meetings with all the individual boards. Thank you. We're driving everybody crazy, but we'll be getting out to all the boards here in June and July that are members of RAFTA. And we're also having another technical advisory committee meeting in late July to circle back with your planning staff so that we can get all the information both to your boards and back to the RAFTA board. So that's...
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, just a brief kind of closing comment. I know how difficult this is, and you never can line up ballot questions to be perfect. There's always competing issues. I've known people who held them off, and then all 5 tax increases pass, and they're like, why wasn't I on board? And other times when nothing passes. But I think that and Dan knows this, last year when we were hoping that this same sort of measure would be placed by the legislature on the ballot and not have to go citizen initiative, and we were both down there testifying in support of it because we know how important the roads are. But we had looked at what the 0.63 would raise in the RAFTA district if we were, quote, able to just raise it ourselves and keep it ourselves. And it's a lot of money. I can't remember if it was around 10 million, maybe 12 million, something like that.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. But at the end of the day, we all still depend on a overall statewide network, whether it's fixing the subsidence on Independence Pass or any of these other roads. And so, if the state doesn't come together as a region, as a whole, to fix it, we're just going to continue to see that deteriorating situation. The last time we had a meeting with our CDOT reps once a year, I asked when was Highway 82 scheduled for repaving in their 5-year plan, and the answer was it's not in the 5-year plan. And all you have to do is drive that road to look at how bad it's alligatoring, separating, and potholed to know that road needs to be fixed before 5 years from now. So, I don't like to lose local control of money, but we depend on a regional system to bring in our groceries every day. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, or Steve?
Yeah, on a different matter, when this poll was taken was when the Castle Creek Bridge project and all of the detours and delays in the traffic were taking place. And when I noticed that the fewer people's thing gave a good grade to RAFTA just between the two polls, the light went on in my head. It probably was affected partly by that project. And did you consider that at all? And did you have any questions that referred at all to the construction project and the traffic delays in Aspen?
We did not specifically ask about the bridge project and traffic delays. I probably sure wanted to, because one day I got stuck in it, and it was very frustrating. Anyways, we did not. You know, with the polling, you do have to be careful. It's a snapshot in time. And to really look at things like RAFTA's rating, or actually we had a slight dip in people being concerned about traffic congestion, because you would think it would have gone up even in Pitkin County with the bridge delays, but we actually had a slight dip in that concern. You really want to start looking at these things over 3-4 polls to really see if there's a trend down or if it's kind of like that. So I probably wouldn't read much into it. And with statistics, there's a margin of error. So actually, in a way, that grade for RAFTA, the concerns over road congestion, are actually really the same statistically. There is not much of a statistical change.
So you have like a 5% kind of a swing in the
we
accuracy.
We did try to get a larger sample size, but people didn't want to answer their phones, so that we could have brought down that margin of error. We actually did go for that, and it was not attainable.
Could I just add, Commissioner Child, it's kind of interesting you asked that question. We were basking in the afterglow of the Grand Avenue Bridge detour in January, and that might have skewed the number up a little bit, because we were still all doing cheers and popping the bubbles in January, because it didn't end till literally Thanksgiving. So that might have bumped up that January number a little bit. So, but anyway, we can read all kinds of things into these polls. So
okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything else before we move to the next item? Thank you, gentlemen. Now,
you very much.
Do you have to leave now and get stuck in traffic going the other way? No? Good point.
I'm going to enjoy the pass.
Enjoy it. Enjoy Leadville. All right, next item, John, please.
Next up is the buttermilk needs analysis that Brian Pettit and crew.
I think Brian Pettit is the crew.
Yes. We have Schmeiser Gordon Meyer representatives here as well.
Get it up here.
While John's doing that, I can just make a quick introduction. I'm Brian Pettit. I'm the Public Works Director for the county. This is not a new project that's been brought before the EOTC. So what I'd like to do is just give a brief history on where this project's been and how it's gotten to today. And then I'd like to talk about the flexibility in funding the project. So first, in October of 2016, the EOTC funded $800,000 to design and engineer an underpass or a crossing at Buttermilk for pedestrians. That was programmed in the capital replacement plan for the EOTC. And at the end of last year, I brought the item back to the EOTC. And I was feeling I had some cold feet that we hadn't studied the area well enough, that we hadn't looked at the pedestrian crossing numbers, and that the cost of this project might be higher than what we anticipated because of the constraints at the site and the amount of utilities located there. So the EOTC early this year decided to complete a feasibility study of the project. And we've done that, and the results will be presented today. The next logical step after we give you the results, the data of this study, would be to fund the design and engineering of the project if the EOTC decides that this is something we want to do. Having said that, and it would be great to have a project in hand to compete regionally for funding, there's no rush in completing this project. We could fund it now, we could put it in the 2019 budget for funding, but anytime you can have the design and engineering on the shelf, it gives us a better opportunity to vie for funding, not only from the region, but from other entities like Open Space and Trails, who this underpass will benefit, like the ski company and like other entities that would benefit by having a pedestrian crossing. So having that, we do have budget flexibility, though, in timing. Representatives from Schmieser Gordon Meyer, who's done the feasibility study, are here. They would like to complete a quick presentation on what their findings are, and then we can go from there.
Great. So gentlemen, if you just introduce yourself for the public record, that'd be great.
My name is Ron Neese. I'm a professional engineer with SGM.
And I'm Dan Coakley, a PE with SGM.
So thank you very much for this time. We did put together a short presentation to show the results of our feasibility study. You have the memo, the feasibility study memo in your packet. So we'll just go through some of the slides and give you some of the highlights of what we found. So the presentation topics that we'll go over briefly were: what was the purpose of this study, the existing conditions at the intersection, and again, this is the intersection of State Highway 82 and Owl Creek Road, right by Buttermilk. We'll go over some of the pedestrian usage counts that we came up with, show some crossing options, both an underpass option and an overpass option, to see how those two configurations fit at this intersection. We did some preliminary, very conceptual cost estimates to give you a range of potential costs for each alternative. We'll talk a little bit about the warrants of a grade-separated pedestrian crossing at this location, and whether we meet some of the thresholds and what are some of the other factors in determining the need. And then we'll finish up with just summary and conclusions. So again, the purpose of this study was to look at the possibility of a grade-separated pedestrian crossing at this intersection, to see how the geometrics would fit within the restricted area, and to see what kind of impacts both an underpass structure or an overpass structure would be at this, and then to come up with some conceptual cost estimates. So existing conditions, and hopefully everybody can see the board here just to lay out a little bit where we're at. This is the existing intersection at 82 and Owl Creek Road. It's signal controlled. There is an existing crosswalk right here going across, and it connects from the sidewalk that runs along 82. The crosswalk goes across, and then there's a connecting sidewalk that goes to the parking lot, and then of course the sidewalk that goes to the Up Valley bus stop. There's also a Down Valley bus stop right here, and that has access to the crosswalk. And then there is an existing bike path that runs along here with accesses down to the sidewalk. But the key thing from this is the pedestrian crossing is right here, just to the south of the intersection. Airport property here, private property on the other side. This is probably really hard to see in this format, but this shows the existing utilities that run mostly along State Highway 82 with a little bit of crossing across the highway. There's also drainage that runs along both sides of the roadway, of the highway. So we have a lot of different types of utilities. We've got water, sanitary sewer, irrigation, electric, fiber optic. And again, right here is a drainage, a storm sewer, and then there's also storm sewer from that inlet here going to an outlet there. So again, this is a little hard to see, but in this format. But basically what we wanted to show is a lot of the utilities are
right there
at the edge of the roadway, at the edge of the highway, and a few crossings in So we did a pedestrian count back in March of this year. We wanted to see what the volumes that were currently using the existing crosswalk. And as you can see, we came up with, and we also compared them with some previous pedestrian counts at Basalt Avenue and at the Aspen Airport Business Center that were done in years prior. We also looked, there was also a count done in 2010 at this same Buttermilk location. So it shows that we did peak hour, found out where the peak hour was for both AM and PM. And then we also did what was the peak period during the day. These were done during 3 consecutive days during ski season. We also took video of the crossing, and from that video we tried to determine how many of the ski resort employees were actually doing this crossing, just kind of as a little extra piece of information. So these numbers were then used to see if the existing pedestrian counts that we were seeing met any warrants for a grade separated pedestrian crossing. So we can come back to that with more questions maybe after the presentation. So based on the existing geometry of the intersection and the location of the crosswalk, we laid out very simple crossing concepts for both an underpass structure and an overpass structure. So in your packet, there is schematic of both concepts that you could take a look at. But for presentation purposes, we thought it would be better to overlay those design concepts on an aerial. I think it's just easier for everybody to see under this format. So first, for the underpass concept, let me find my cursor here. There we go. So what this is showing is the gray with the light blue is the actual underpass structure. So this would be a box structure, 14 feet wide, approximately 8 feet tall walls with another 12-inch clearance arch over the top. Approximately 110 feet tall. This one was 115 feet long. And we showed this particular concept just to the south, just up valley of the existing crossing. So again, here is the existing crossing. Here is the new underpass structure, mainly to avoid just some of the utilities and the drainage conflicts here. So we moved it a little bit this direction. The darker green color would show where the retaining walls would be needed. This elevation of the sidewalk would be approximately 14 feet or so, 12 to 14 feet below the grade of the roadway. So then from the entrance and exits of the underpass, the sidewalk, the connecting sidewalks would have to go up and connect to existing sidewalks. So on the east side, we are tying directly into the existing bike path alignment, but the bike path would have to be lowered significantly to tie into the approach to the underpass. We assumed, for the sake of this feasibility study, that we could not go into this property here, that we couldn't swing out the bike path. So we're showing this, what's shown in gray, from basically this limit, which is up valley, and this limit, which is down valley. This would be the limit of reconstruction of the bike path in order to get grades that would be approaching ADA compliance. So as you can see, as you go up valley, the bike path is going uphill, so it takes us longer to make up that approximately 14-foot elevation difference. So we have to really reconstruct quite a bit of sidewalk to get to here.
But are you saying that if we were able to work with the property owner, it would be easier?
Yes.
Yes.
In some ways, there's a berm. There's a berm kind of in this area, so it may mean less retaining wall if we can move the bike path up to there, and then maybe have an alternative type of connection to the bike path. So there could be less reconstruction if we could swing it out.
Okay.
More like that. But for the parameters of this study, we
Sure.
assumed that we couldn't encroach onto that property.
How wide was it? Two questions. How wide was the tunnel? 14 feet?
Yes.
Why? It's
That
pedestrian.
was based on the other valley crossings that we saw.
So we-
Basalt.
The one at El Jabal is not that wide.
So we assumed the most recent that we've constructed at ABC and at Basalt, which have
Okay, so we had 177 people.
Right.
Is that, how many of those were SKICO employees?
Like 7.
7?
Roughly half. During the peak hour, roughly half of them.
Okay.
Mark, I can tell you the one at Willis, because I use that very often. That's not a good width nor a...
Well, it doesn't feel very, very safe, but, you know, it's a lot less expensive. The point is, it's 177 and half are SKICO employees, and, I mean, you look at the cost and the benefit, yes, safety is very much of a benefit, but I'm starting to struggle.
Well, I think you'd have more users. We found that when you put in an underpass, you have a lot more users that feel safe crossing that. I don't know,
Do we
but
have data? It'd be interesting to see some data points.
Yeah, because, you know, you see that in the underpasses we've constructed at Basalt, how many more people are using that. And we have a lot of people who continue to jaywalk, too. So it would be great to get them funneled. Dan, you're going to need to come to a mic.
One question I have is, you know, during the X Games, I don't know how many thousands of people are crossing.
A lot.
Section.
They're going to continue to cross.
You know, we transported, the year before last, 59,000 passengers in one day, system-wide.
Yeah.
The only way to get to and from Buttermilk for the games is on transit. And all of the regional passengers that are coming from all the communities down valley and going back, and to some extent people that are going to the parking lot are crossing the highway at that time. So, I mean, how do you, I mean, is that a blip? And even though it's probably in total numbers more than use the ABC on an annual basis. Does it just, well, we discount that because it's a 4-day event, or does that weigh into your thinking in terms of whether or not it might be warranted?
It won't show up in the pedestrian counts because it is a special event. But part of one of the factors in looking at a pedestrian crossing is special use events or special needs pedestrians, things like that. And that was one of the factors that we did add to our memo, saying that the X Games does have a huge generator of pedestrians, but we can't say that on a daily basis it's much beyond what we're seeing here.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, but let me just jump in real quick. I also think we've just redesigned that parking lot, and we're incentivizing people to use it so that they can ride the bus from there. And that would, I think, better utilize that parking lot for people who would now feel safe crossing that street.
Yeah,
Rachel,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to make the same point that how many spaces are available both for daily commuters and then kind of long range?
Is it 170, I believe?
170. So although that won't be a daily use, if you had half of those people, that's another 85 who are going to be getting off on the right-hand side of the highway and needing to cross over to pick up their cars at the end of the day. And that is one of the alternatives for people for snowmass to park and take a bus in and not have to pay to park in town, things like that.
That is the true benefit to snowmass. Dan?
And last summer, we used that as overflow parking for the Maroon Bells service, too. And
Right.
if that became a place of departure in a more prominent way in the future, and you wanted people to ride there on transit to catch the buses to go up to the Bells, although they maybe could still transfer at Maroon Creek. I think the thing is that you hit on it. If I'm a parent, am I going to let my kid go up and cross that highway? There are adults even, we heard in Basalt that didn't want to cross 82 at the Basalt Avenue intersection because of all the turning movements, the speed of the vehicles, and so forth. So it poses a bit of a barrier, and I know the numbers don't reflect the 300 that you need to have a warrant for it, but the fact that it's kind of hazardous and a long way across the highway may be a disincentive for people to actually want to get there on bus.
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah. One other kind of small thing. This past legislative session, I believe some legislation was passed at county request to change the setting of speed limits via warrant studies so that more conditions could be taken into account. I'm not sure if it would affect warrant studies for projects through CDOT per se, but they definitely changed that standard away from just how fast do people use it now and that's your warrant, you know. Anyhow, that'd be worth investigating.
The other thing too, real quick, Brian, is that we're also looking at, we had an issue with parking at the airport. And we are looking at how we might be able to utilize that intercept lot at Buttermilk, to facilitate, and then those people would have to be crossing with luggage across that intersection. So that would also be a benefit to everybody who uses our airport. Snowmass from Aspen Basalt.
That's right. And if I could just add, I just want to make sure we're clear that this warrant study is just a standard that we targeted. It doesn't warrant whether the project can be done or not. Okay. That's through a permit with CDOT. So it's just a standard that we used for this feasibility study.
Michael Miracle, did you know we were just talking about you? If you'd like to make comments, you need to come to a mic, though. Are you here representing the ski company on this issue, I assume? Yeah, just grab a mic.
I don't want to interrupt their
No, go ahead.
flow, though. Is it a good time? Just
Yeah, go ahead.
I've seen the skier numbers highlighted there in yellow. Michael Miracle, Aspen Skiing Company. I took a look at this and have been at the EOTC meetings at which this has been discussed. And I want to, seeing those numbers, those skier numbers highlighted in yellow, maybe I'm misreading that a little bit, but it maybe sounds like we're starting to sort of like lay out the groundwork for an ask for SkiCo to help pay for this potentially. And those numbers are a tiny percentage of the skiers who would be skiing at Buttermilk, who would be arriving at Buttermilk during that time period. So for one, our skier shuttle, which drops skiers right at the base, they don't have to cross that intersection, is bringing vastly more skiers to Buttermilk and employees than our crossing of that intersection. And I just want to, and I see that in the 3.65 mill levy, that it's the Buttermilk underpass or the Buttermilk pedestrian crossing is on the list as being covered by that funding. So I'm just
$500,000.
Right.
Of potentially $9 million. So am I right that that's roughly?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to point out a couple things in the packet that this needs assessment. On page 23, 4 bullets up from where it says other GSPCs of Highway 82, it says crash data incidents, pedestrian vehicle incidents have not been noted at this location. So I think we've all been talking about this like it's a dangerous intersection, but this study would seem to suggest that it is not. And then one bullet up from there, and that summary bullet, the last sentence there talks about the reduction in the delay for vehicles that the pedestrian crossing, the 35 seconds costs. And it says that the reduction in delay, although an improvement, has negligible impact to the overall intersection level of service. So two of the big rationales, I think, in the needs argument maybe are not all that compelling. And I think we're kind of using a lot of anecdotal evidence here about the importance of this. For us, this feels like it is a real nice to have if we could snap our fingers and make it happen. But in terms of it sort of rising to that need to have level, where we would feel, obligated to pay for it, we would be looking at these bullets and saying, where's the real need to have argument here? And on the X Games crossing point, I've crossed there during X Games. That's probably the most controlled intersection in the valley during the X Games. You've got policemen out there,
45 police officers
stopping traffic. Like I've never in my life felt so safe crossing the street than during the X Games.
But just so you know, Michael, I was one of those statistics that didn't get reported because I put my hand on the hood of the car, so it didn't hit me at that intersection.
I appreciate that, but
So I
these
think we've
guys
had a lot of near
these guys
misses.
did a study on this. And
May I just interject one thing, and that is that Irma Yurchenko, who lives used to live in employee housing at Maroon Creek, affordable housing, she was hit by a car. And she was severely injured at that intersection. That's not in their report. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know how far back you looked, but I know the woman personally. I had conversations with her, and it's dark, and people can get hurt there. One person was hit at the ABC, which prompted that underpass to be developed, and it's a great asset for the community. So I'm surprised to hear you say what you're saying.
Yeah. Well,
So let's light the intersection.
the crossing at Con 600, I think somebody got killed there.
Right, but it's one of those cases, we don't want to wait till somebody dies to put in the underpass if we choose to go in that direction.
Right, yeah, I just
I know,
wanna
I appreciate the
point
clarification.
those things out. Again, it just feels like maybe the ask is looming, and we're wondering if it's the best use of dollars and et cetera.
Well, we're hoping we can find a variety of funding opportunities, but it would be nice if we move forward to at least have ski companies' blessing.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's not there. I'm just saying that
That's what you're going to look at.
It seems like highlighting the skier numbers when we know that's a tiny percentage of the people who are coming to Buttermilk.
Right.
Tiny percentage. When we would certainly be open to talking about it. I just wanted to get on the record that those bullets in this packet have been noticed by us.
Thank you. George, did you want to? Is there anybody? Sorry, but this table is difficult for me because I can't see around the corners. But
you have to look behind people.
Did they finish up because there's a concert starting at 6?
I would just add to that. I think that if we look at the breakdown of those folks, the ones who are on the RAFTA buses and crossing are probably more Valley residents, whereas the people coming in on the buses are probably coming from hotels and lodges and condos across the routes. So, in some ways it's about, are we taking care of our local population who are the ones riding the RAFTA Valley buses up Valley and coming to Buttermilk for school ski day and things like that.
so, Brian, because Marky said that they need to get us moving so they can go to a concert. But
Okay, I don't think we're done with the presentation yet, so if we can just rifle through that.
I'll just go real quick.
Sorry, but I think conversation was needed. So
Understood.
So again, I covered most of the underpass design factors. Something that I didn't mention, the drainage system, of course, for the underpass would have to be a little bit more extensive. There would be underpass lighting and structure lighting. There's a lot of grading opportunities back in this. The green kind of represents where we could maybe not have retaining wall per se, but able to grade and have slopes that could be landscaped and vegetated. Then, of course, the significant design factors for the underpass are the significant utility impacts and also the construction traffic control for moving traffic on State Highway 82 back and forth while the underpass gets built. Of course, the main benefit of an underpass is it's kind of the no visual impacts, and it's kind of the standard for this corridor. So we looked at the airport underpass as kind of an example. This is what that location looks like. So it has some similarities. It has the bus stops, kind of the same width, length, and kind of the same tunnel structure, the underpass structure. So we kind of just threw that in there to show a similar location where an underpass was built along the corridor. So this is the overpass crossing concept, and again, the light gray going across the highway would be the clear span of a bridge going over the highway, and that is a 100-foot clear span. Again, we use 14-foot wide. So the abutments for the bridge structure would be set back off of the edge of the road and also maybe off the edge of the sidewalk as well. And then because now you're talking about a 22-foot vertical difference between the deck of the bridge structure with that of the roadway, it'll take kind of a longer run out to tie into existing sidewalk. And also it kind of reverses the length on to having a longer approach reconstruction of the bike path more to the down valley side, because now we're going from a high point here and chasing downhill grade to tie in. I should point out that there is an existing retaining wall right here along the bike path that would need to be reconstructed as well. And that's true for the underpass project as well. So we, again, assumed that we cannot encroach into this property. This could either be a retaining wall from the high point down to the existing ground, or it could be piers, so it would have some open area underneath. There's probably not as much opportunity to grade fill material from the bike path down to the existing ground. That also, we would maintain the connection to the bike path and have a sidewalk that goes underneath the bridge in order to keep a most direct route for somebody who's accessing the bus stop.
And ADA compliancy, you have a ramp on one side, ramp on both, or do you need an elevator?
Ramp on both sides. And we'd actually put stairs here. There's stairs here. It's hard to see. Sorry about that. We would actually put stairs here so that way people could have a very direct way of getting up to the structure. But these approaches would all be ramps with DIA or ADA compliance.
Okay. Ward, did you have a question?
Yeah, just so I'm clear on this, isn't that Buttermilk parking lot only available for transportation really in the summertime? In the wintertime, it's used for skiing parking?
It's used for skiing in the wintertime, but it's also used as transit parking all winter long.
And how many spots are the same 170 or so that?
It depends on the amount of people that are skiing, but it's used, that lot that's nearest 82 is used primarily for transit parking and people accessing Highlands as well. So there is a lot of transit parking available at Buttermilk during the wintertime.
Okay.
Brian, are those transit spots reserved in the wintertime?
They are not reserved.
No. Okay.
So some of the design factors we already talked about, kind of the same design factors as the underpass. We would locate the bridge structure a little bit more up valley from the current crosswalk in order to ensure sight distances for signal heads and things like that. Structure lighting would be required. So we showed two examples of just examples of pedestrian overcrossings. One of them is more simple one. This is at Platte Canyon High School over 285. Mm-hmm. And it's fairly simplistic structure on abutments on both sides, about the same length as what would be needed here, 100 feet long. Then this is a much more complex structure at crossing Wadsworth Boulevard in Denver. Very extensive retaining walls, long approach ramps, but then there are some stair structures and some piers and columns to support the structure as well. So again, the benefits of the overpass is you're not having to impact as many utilities. You'd only be excavating for the abutments mostly and the foundations. It wouldn't be across the whole entire highway. And it would also be much more simple construction and traffic control required because most of the work is going on the edges of the road. But of course, the downside would be the significant visual impacts, and it would be kind of not typical for the corridor. So we did put together some really, based on these layouts, which are very conceptual, we did look at some of the other underpass and overpass costs in the area, and kind of took off some really conceptual quantities for both layouts and came up with some really rough cost estimate ranges. We assumed a certain length per feet for both the underpass and the overpass and the retaining walls, which is consistent to other projects. So for the underpass, kind of gave a big range of $7.5 to $9.5 million, which is consistent with the other existing underpasses, and kind of showed kind of what the big discipline costs are. Retaining walls, excavation, of course, would be great. That includes any shoring that needs to be done, dewatering, things like that. Drainage would be significant because we're really putting, the underpass would divide the current drainage systems. Utility relocations is a high percentage, and traffic control is a high percentage. And because of, possibly because of the construction and traffic control, it may require 2 construction seasons to fully complete the project. For the overpass, we gave a range of 4.5 to 5.5 million. The reduction in cost is mostly assuming that traffic control and utility locations would be much less. Plus the structure itself is probably a little higher cost per length than the underpass. But then when you throw in the other factors, the excavation, the drainage impacts, the utility relocations, and the traffic control, for the underpass, that's what drives that cost up. For the overpass, those costs are a little bit less, and we feel that the overpass structure could be built in 1 season. So this now gets into, so that was mostly looking at the geometrics of the intersection and just seeing if there's any major design issues that we'd have to be aware of, and that portion of our study showed that there's enough room to build both configurations. So the next slide kind of shows the need or the justification for putting in a grade separated pedestrian crossing at this location. And again, a lot of the warrants that are used nationally look at locations for a grade separated crossing at uncontrolled locations. So, you know, where they're seeing a lot of pedestrians crossing a highway or an arterial, not at an intersection that has control at it. So a lot of the warrants, a lot of the thresholds that are given for pedestrians and volumes and gap times and things like that are for a location where people are just darting across the road and there's no control of traffic, yet that there's still a generator for pedestrians to cross there. So our situation is a little different. It is at a controlled intersection. There is a crosswalk that does work at the location. But we still listed all the different factors that are usually considered in determining whether a grade separation is needed. This one highlights a few of them, the ones that probably have the most significance to this location. So they include, you know, the vehicle volumes on 82, the pedestrian volumes that we're seeing for the crossing. We looked at the intersection and vehicle delay and did an analysis on that. And we determined that the benefit of a grade separated crossing at this intersection does reduce vehicle delay, but it's very insignificant amount. And we wouldn't see a level of service change in the operation of the intersection. Also, one of the criteria is there an acceptable crossing close by, grade separated crossing that people could use as an alternative? And in this case, there's one to the north and one to the south, up valley, down valley, but they're too far away to be usable, legitimate alternative. So people will use the grade crossing now as opposed to walking either up valley or down valley. Special needs population, whether, you know, there was a large group of pedestrians using this crossing that need extra time to cross. We didn't see that as being a factor on this one, but it's something to consider. We did look at things like the X Games, that does generate a big spike in pedestrian usage. So a grade separated crossing would be beneficial for things like that. And then one of the big factors, again, is just what the community and what the users expect. They see other grade separated crossings, and if those are working well, then there could be the expectation that this one could be a good candidate for a grade separated. There's more detail in the memo, but just on the slides, I just wanted to highlight a few of the key ones. So we could talk a little bit more about that. So just in conclusion, basically the purpose of this study was to look at the geometrics of putting in an underpass or an overpass. And we feel that there's no real major restrictions to the location. There could be challenges, of course, but nothing that really concerns us that we couldn't overcome with good engineering design. The vehicle volumes are at or near the thresholds required for a grade separated crossing, so that's the volumes on 82. And by putting in an undercrossing, like I said before, it would provide a slight reduction in vehicle delay. And then the underpass configuration, even though it had more costs and had more challenges, was obviously more compatible with the other structures that we see along the corridor. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Brian, we need to get this, but so the ask, we are looking at maybe putting it into budget discussions in the fall.
Okay.
And would that be for the engineering and design so we can have plans on the shelf?
Correct.
Which I think is critical if we're going to be looking at other sources of funding, which I think we'd have hopefully the availability to pursue. We all know when you have plans on the shelf, you get bumped up to the top of that line. So is there anything more that you wanted to present, Brian?
That's it.
Is there any more discussion from the board? Because we have perfect timing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
George, sorry.
No, that's fine. I'd just like to make some comments. I think the EOTC as a board we've always been visionary, and I see as with the success of the Aspen Airport Business Center underpass as well as the Basalt underpass, how successfully they have been. And so I look at this as sort of a long term. Frankly, I don't think the X Games are going to be here in 20 years, right, for me. So, but we know that this is still a small component as we try to chip away at our congestion problem created by the Up Valley traffic. So for me, I always look at the long term. What do you think we're going to be looking at in 20, 30 years? And I think, again, the success of the other underpasses show that they are heavily used. They actually move the traffic a little faster. This particular location is kind of interesting because, as you know, within maybe a quarter mile or so, we have 3 different traffic lights. And so that helps to contribute to that backup and that long queue. So this would eliminate or help reduce that queue, at least waiting for pedestrians to cross. In terms of the size, Markey, I would challenge you to want to walk through the Willets on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock at night and feel that you think you're safe.
Well,
I know people that won't walk through there our age because they don't feel they're safe, and so the Willets is an outdated structure. It was done way before.
Using that as an example.
I know, but I'm just saying it because it relates to cost, obviously.
Right.
And I think the cost warrants the safety and the comfort of the people to actually feel that they're going to be able to use those. The overpass, we had that discussion with the Airport Business Center. The community was not in alignment with it. I think they'll be even less in alignment with the buttermilk because as you get closer to town, you start to really impact the visual views of the beauty of coming to Aspen. So for me, if we were to do this, it would only be an underpass and not an overpass. But I would just take the long view. the safety aspects, trying to chip away at our congestion problem. This was one of the ideas that came out of the Aspen Institute's community forum with a long list as well. So.
Marky, did you?
Yeah, I sure do. I was using the Willows as just an example that cost hardly any money. The point that I want to raise, though, is we've spent a lot of time talking about RAFTA and the need to fund RAFTA with a tax increase, which is very significant. It's not cheap when you look to every one of the voters that we're going to have to rely on. I really have problems if we move forward with another huge funding request for a study to have it ready for the budget. I'm more focused on, let's put this as a placeholder in the budget. We have got to work on the RAFTA proposal. And I think we're going to get some negative black eyes before too long if we just keep spending money. This may be a need. I'm not going to argue it may not be a need. But the question becomes one of our priorities. Is it RAFTA? Is it underpass? Or what is it?
Yeah, I understand that. For me, it's two separate issues, but.
Well, they're two separate issues, but that's not how the taxpayer looks at it.
Well, I think that for me, the key thing is that if we're looking at funding somewhere down the line, we're going to be looking at other sources. That's why we need the plans on the shelf, or we're not going to have any luck in that, because we don't have anything in the queue right now for that funding. Yeah, Bob, please.
So I'm not a fan of anecdotal evidence. And there's been a lot of anecdotal discussion today in support of this underpass overpass. George just brought up another anecdotal point that the Airport Business Center underpass is being used by a lot more people than had been before. So I guess, Brian, what I would like to ask, at the next time that we bring this up, that we get as much real evidence, real numbers of before and after in Basalt and at the ABC, and let's really try to get some hard data on the before and after with these underpasses.
I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean,
that would be helpful.
It might be hard to do that since we can do the before because we're already after.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be difficult, but the point is, people were crossing at the ABC and in Basalt, and ABC, because I used to cross there, people would be crossing all over the place.
Right.
And in Basalt, you could stand by that traffic light, and every day you would see a car run the red light. And so it's not that we're increasing the number of people who are crossing, we're increasing the safety of those who are crossing.
The safety is one issue, but for 177 people a day to spend $9 million, and that, by the way, is probably only over a 3-month period when the ski mountain's open. I mean, to me, that's not a value-added equation.
Yeah, well, if it was your child who got hit, you might take a different
I understand, but it's not a value-added. We have a fiduciary responsibility to spend the money wisely. In order to carry out that responsibility, there should be a value-added proposition. And I just don't think this is a value at this moment, without the hard evidence. I don't feel this is a value-added proposition.
We'll have to see how we can convince you with some hard evidence. But I'm going to move to Rachel. I'm going to move to Rachel because she needs to be on the road.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're not having to have a decision today or vote. This is, again, just information. And a few things, I agree entirely with George that overpasses just shouldn't even be part of the discussion. That's just not going to happen. And I personally can't really separate RAFTA from underpasses the same way because they're there for the people when they get off the bus. Half the time while you're riding the bus is because you have connectivity to where you want to go, you're close to where you got to go, you feel safe, it's where you're parking, whatever. But an underpass and RAFTA, it's the access point to where you're going. So I'm down with that. You know, we could take the OSHA standards and say, you know, a human life is worth X, and after we've lost X many lives, it's worth spending the $9 million. But that's really more of what it is to me. You know, when you talk about safety, it's not fender benders. It is, you know, the potential, and you try to avoid that. All that being said, what I'd like to look at is, are there interim safety improvements that could be made that are separate from doing the full-blown $9 million intersection? Maybe
Like the intersection.
you know, but you know, I've seen in Aspen, as time and pedestrian vehicle potentials have increased, that we've got the little push the button, the lights flash, there's people crossing. You know, could it be queued up so that when that we put in the lights, or we pay the extra electronics, that when somebody pushes the crosswalk button, some lights flash as well to let people know that there's someone in the crosswalk? Or, I mean, there's got to be something, a step in between, or a few steps in between. So I'd like to see what those may be, and that might be something we could advance as well in the interim.
I still would like to look at that
Thank you.
bike path along the front of the concert. Yeah, the inn at Aspen. Steve, and then Steve. Pick your. Thanks. Oh, it wasn't you?
I have quite frequently parked at the Buttermilk parking lot and actually used this intersection, ridden the Rafta bus into town and then gotten off in the afternoon. Going into town is easy, but in the afternoon, and I've never done it at night where I had to cross there. But I have had the experience at the Basalt crossing of 2 different times nearly hitting a pedestrian who was racing across before the underpass was there. When it was very dusky, the light was getting pretty dim. I also was nearly hit crossing that old snowmass in broad daylight by a car running the red light. So I've had a lot of different experiences with these different crosswalks. I would say that any of the long crosswalks across all these multiple lanes, 6 lanes of Highway 82, are intimidating, and they're really a disincentive to pedestrians to ride the Rafta bus. That being said, though, looking at the cost of doing an underpass is so huge, and I wouldn't be prepared to vote yes on this today. I'd need to have more information and look at different alternatives. One alternative I think we should consider is to look at a bigger stretch of the highway and try to eliminate one of the 2 stoplights and somehow change the configuration of the roads there so we could streamline the traffic somewhat, the automobile traffic. So that's a broader study of that whole quarter mile of the road or half mile of the road. Another thing that I think should be considered is a way that people, I also use WeCycle a lot, and to tie WeCycle in on the Buttermilk side, and they could potentially go on a bike path down to the Truscott underpass there.
Right.
Or at the
But there's no path.
Maroon Creek.
There's no path there, so I think that's, looking at a broader stretch of the highway, I think there are some different options that we should consider in this whole process.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this, and as far as we have 2 more items, it would be my suggestion that we have staff just send out an email to everyone with just those quick updates. Does that work for everybody, so we can call the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
John, is that okay with you?
Sorry, say that again.
We have the other 2 items, Regional Transportation Director and the Castle Creek Bridge Helm Street Project update. Can you just send us a quick brief email to all of those, all of us? Sure. And then we can wrap this meeting. Next meeting is October the 19th. I'm not sure where that'll be. Snowmass? Or here? City? With the city? All right. So John, do I need a formal motion to adjourn this meeting? We just quit? All right. GrassRoots, thank you very much. We are done. Thanks. You guys drive carefully back to Snowmass.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.